All right, well, let's go ahead and get rolling. Well, I do appreciate everybody's time here today. Like I mentioned, it's a relatively niche topic, but it's, I think, one that's very impactful for a couple different reasons. So, number one is, I'll give an introduction to what we do here at Reviewr, but over the last couple of years, we've seen a tremendous growth and a rise in the number of not just scholarships, but also grant initiatives, being powered by credit unions. And I think it's a good convergence of two things. So, number one is there's very clear benefit and ROI to you guys as a credit union. We're targeting a demographic of member that I think is really essential for the long-term sustainability, right, of membership-based groups. But also engaging with like young or unengaged accounts as a way to generate longer lifetime value from them. But then two, and equally, if not more important, is the direct impact it has on your community, right? Which is really part of the mission and vision of most credit unions. And so, because of that, we want to kind of just walk through, and I'll leave a couple more questions here in the chat for you guys to answer, but run through obviously like why these are such core programs for you guys to be offering. If you guys are already offering some of these programs, I don't need to be terribly redundant. I will follow up here today with a link to both this recap and then also this deck. You guys don't want to sit here and actually read all these slides. I think what you want is more interactive tours and introductions. So you can kind of read through this on your own time at your own pace, and we'll kind of just go with it. But at the end of the day, when we kind of get into the scholarship side of things, I talked about youth member activation. So this isn't a challenge unique to credit unions. At Reviewr, we work with a large number of membership-based associations. And what we're trying to do here is target a very young demographic of member who can, of course, stay with us and open 6, 10, 12 accounts over the course of, 40, 50 years. So what better way to activate them through both financing scholarships, but also getting them engaged into financial literacy programs, a longer impact with you guys, their families, their spouses, et cetera. So before I go too much deeper, I do want to kind of introduce myself and why we're kind of qualified to have this conversation. What makes us very, very unique is not only do we provide an online scholarship management software, but we built it very purpose driven. So back in about 2010, our team was directly tied to funding initiatives like scholarships. We served on the volunteer review committees and boards for these types of campaigns. And not to be too terribly long-winded, at that point in time, a very typical scholarship campaign was done through paper, if you can believe it or not. And I will also toss in another kind of quick question here in the chat, not to offend anybody if you're doing this through paper right now. But way back then, all scholarship applications would come in through paper, copies are made, binders were built. And as a pure volunteer review committee, we had hundreds and hundreds of binders physically mailed to our doorstep. And we were tasked with handwriting notes and feedback and scores, which were quite subjective, and then sending it back in for selection. So from a pure operation perspective, nobody wanted to apply because nobody wanted to fill out physical, manual, paper-based applications. Operationally speaking, it was a complete nightmare trying to compile those and make those binders. And then from a review perspective, again, it was being sent to us. Where we ran into the most challenges, and this is actually in the chat that I just put in there, is bullet point number 2. When organizations understood and realized the impact that the scholarships program had, they attempted to scale it. And in doing so, they tried to implement tools and technologies to create efficiency. So they use their websites, they have built-in web forms. From there is a lot of downloading and exporting emails, spreadsheets, downloading of documents, Google Drive. And so from a pure operation perspective, like the same amount of work went into that as it did through paper, which is quite surprising. But then from a pure volunteer perspective, we spent 4x the time reviewing scholarship applications. We had to go to Google Drive, we had to download them, we had to leave our comments in spreadsheets, and we had to send it back. And two very problematic things started happening, which is kind of bringing this conversation full circle. Number one was the challenge in data redaction. So in a small, close-knit environment, we know who the applicants are. You guys know who your members are. You know who their families are. So when we saw things like name and demographic details, and sometimes things like social security numbers, it created a very concerning data security component, but then also compliance from a bias review. So when a team would get together, instead of reviewing the merits of an applicant, they were looking at their demographic details, who they knew, friends of their family, and it led to very clear biases in the selections. On the other end of things, people got misplaced, right? So if you're collecting all these scholarship applications through like, Google Forms or Jot Forms, you have to download them and put them into spreadsheets. It's very easy to misalign a single row or a column or forget to attach a certain document. And so 6 months later, after funds were sent, applicants would call up and they'd say, hey, like, what is the status of my application? And here these organizations are saying, well, we don't know who you are. We never even looked at you. And the reason why is because it was misplaced. So again, it's very unfortunate, very unfair to them. It's also a big compliance concern. And then one thing that I will talk about here extensively today is impact reporting. So, 3, 4 years goes into this, and we look at the metrics and we say, well, over the last 4 years, we funded 220 students or members for $120,000. How are we as a credit union measuring the ROI that we're having, both on the applicants' lives, right? How are they using the funds? How are we changing their career trajectory? How are we impacting our local communities? But then also internally, what does the ROI look like for us as a credit union? And these questions are very hard to answer. So because of these experiences, we built Reviewr as an online platform to power these scholarships from literally start to finish. So everything from the intake of applications all the way through impact reporting. We do a couple thousand of these campaigns per year. And kind of like I mentioned before, credit unions over the last 2 years has been kind of a really growth minded industry, right? You guys are starting to identify a tremendous funding gap that's happening within the communities and within the ecosystem. And you've stepped in now to kind of fill that gap. So kudos to you guys. Again, why we're having this conversation today, though, is that you have these great intentions of running scholarships. On average, a typical credit union does about 40,000 give or take per year in scholarship funding. You've got many, many out there doing 150,000 plus. You've got quite a few doing 20,000. But at the end of the day, every single dollar that you invest into your scholarships is directly impacting the lives of that member or of that applicant, and two, it's direct future LTV or lifetime value to your credit union, right? And so when we start to look at processes and workflows, think of it like a chain link perspective. If any of the chains that go into managing the logistics break, all the future chains also break at that point. So good intentions and goodwill come in. We're collecting applications, we're making selections, but we're not collecting impact stories or reports. Or on the application side of things, maybe we have a tremendous drop-off rates because it's a low barrier application form, which on the trail end means that we're not impacting as many people as we want. Or you've collected your applications, but there's no qualitative review selection metric in place to make sure that A, we're not being biased, but also B, that we're actually selecting the most qualified recipients, right? So again, the most impactful students or applicants are not even the ones being selected. So that's that chain that I'm talking about. So what I wanted to do today is basically kind of scale back, look at the credit unions that we currently work with, and then couple that with the other 2,000 scholarships from like your major Ivy League universities to your family foundations to your community foundations. And what are they doing really, really well to kind of button up this disconnected workflow that you can take and apply to your programs right away? So the goal here today is not by no means to demo Reviewr. If you guys are interested in doing that, I did drop a link in the chat. What I do want to do is though is talk through 3 experiences. What does the applicant member experience look like? What does the operational experience look like? And then what does a very structured review selection experience look like? And then within each of those 3, like what are 2 to 3 kind of impactful elements that I think you guys can walk away with today with or without Reviewr and implement into your programming? So again, all these slides and all the things that you see on my page, I will share back out. What I really want to do though is kind of dive deeper into like these, what I call 3 experiences. There is a 4th one here as a little bonus that I'm going to inject here, which is like ongoing impact reporting. I think it's kind of that lost, understood component to scholarships. I think is essential for you guys, especially as you work with donors and sponsors and funders to either reapply for additional funding or keep the current donors that you guys have. So with all that said, I want to focus on the scholar experience. So I am going to quickly jump over to Reviewr to kind of mimic some of these workflows. But at the end of the day, you've got one job as far as collecting applications, and it is to lower the barrier for scholar success. We live in a time now where these are generally younger individuals. They're people who are accustomed to using online tools, mobile responsive, mobile friendly, and they have a direct interaction that they want to have. You would be shocked at the number of organizations that we work with where they tell us that scholars will start an application, and if it's not user friendly enough, or if they've got concerns around the process, they don't come back. And better yet, like their family and their parents and how livid that they are that their sons and daughters are leaving money on the table. But that's just the way it is, right? We have to have a very low frictionless experience for the applicants. We want them to come in. We want all of their time and all of their attention to go to their content creation. In a world without infinite money, these selection processes can be and should be quite competitive. So how do we put them into a position where they can tell a personal story to differentiate themselves from their peers? So if we think through like what our applications look like, don't make them overly complex. What is the crucial, most critical things that you need from them to be able to differentiate them versus them peers, and things like that. So there's a few things that we're going to look into. Number one is a profile-based application. So for those of you, obviously, you're all credit unions. Think about this from like a mortgage perspective versus a typical online form. Nobody likes to fill out mortgage applications. So what do you guys do? You build these interactive tools and these interactive portals that show progress, and they show the tasks and the activities. And by the time that they're done, they feel like they've just been interacting with a tool, not sitting down and filling out hours and hours of paper. Uh, the other thing I want to look at is going to be eligibility screening. So every single one of you guys has very clear eligibility requirements, or maybe you are on the larger end and you offer multiple different scholarship funds. How do you best align a particular scholar with the donor fund that they belong to? And then the third piece is, which is I think absolutely critical, which is reference collection. There is no better way to give your applicants a voice and differentiate themselves from their peers than collecting references. With that said, we just injected an entirely new user type, which is the person writing the reference. How do you make it low barrier for them, but then also create a consistent experience for the review? So I am going to jump really quickly to Reviewr to help you guys visualize like what this concept looks like. So at the end of the day, no matter what tools or processes that you guys have, the scholar profile is the number one takeaway for you guys here today. There are so many moving parts to managing a scholarship. You've got people, forms, files, communication, review and selection. For many of you guys, you're likely going to be having them come back and do like fund disbursement forms and acceptance packets. And then in a perfect world, like 1 year from now, survey them. How did you use the funds? How did it impact your life, right? That's the ROI tracking that I talked about. The only way that you can A, systematize this and then B, consolidate this is through a profile. So the applicant or the member kind of comes in, they tell us who they are, and then it drops them directly into the scholarship experience. So again, I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds of this. It's just a very simple, basic example. But again, the number one goal here is to make it very low barrier, ADA compliant, mobile responsive. Most applicants will and always will procrastinate, right? And so the idea is that if we know that they want to enter this process, see what's being requested from them, and then go work offline, get their references, get their transcripts. We want to make sure we make it simple so they can save, they can log out, they can come back later, it auto saves. We will come back to that from a pure tracking perspective. But again, we want these to be as interactive as humanly possible. When it gets into things like eligibility, two things come into play. If you have a larger program, what you probably find yourselves doing is having to vet through all of these submitted applications and figure out, number one, who's even eligible and who's not. So that's a time element on your team staff. Number two, we're wasting the applicant's time applying for opportunities that they don't align with. So whatever your rules, requirements, eligibility are, we can load them into a system like Reviewr, have the applicants answer a series of questions, basically building a persona about themselves. And then based off of those answers, we can basically say, yes, you know what, you are eligible to move on, or no, you're not wasting their time nor yours. Now, again, for those of you that offer multiple scholarships, each and every one of them may have A, its own unique requirements, and B, its own deliverables, right? So the next piece to this is to take that information and say, hey, not only are you eligible, but out of the 5 or 7 or 8 scholarships that we offer, these are the 3 that you best align with. Now, which of or all of them do you want to apply for? The reason why this is really beneficial is that applicants have no idea what opportunities are available. So many of these scholarships go underfunded or under applied for. So we're helping bring awareness to opportunity to them. But also at the same time, we can start to be very hyper specific in what we're collecting. So in my example here, maybe the Lennox Wilder scholarship has a very specific essay prompt that the Brooke Marlowe one doesn't. So the system should be able to read what scholarship that they chose and then kind of serve up them very unique experiences or applications that relate. On that note, if you are offering multiple scholarships and you allow an applicant to apply to multiple, we don't want to have redundancies. What I mean by that is I, as Kyle, the scholar, have not changed from one application to the next, right? My name, my email, all that stuff is the same. So if that is the case, don't ask me to repeat and resubmit that each and every time. So the system would then pull forward all those deliverables and then only ask them to fill out the unique questions that relate to their choice. Now, as far as scholarship data collection goes, again, you guys can customize this. You can collect whatever data you want. At the end of the day, though, what your really goal here is to do is build a comprehensive picture of who the scholar is. Again, in a world without infinite money, unfortunately, not every applicant can be selected. So you basically need to build this comprehensive picture of each scholar that you can then use as a comparative to one another to make the most informed decisions you can. Me personally, as we design scholarships, try to focus on three core areas. One of which is academic related and or community impact. So, tell us about your grades, your test scores. What do you want to go to school for? Tell us more about your extracurricular activities. How many volunteer hours do you have? The next piece of that is financial needs. Again, not everybody is made equal. You got some people who are in financial hardship. You might have an applicant who comes from a high earning family. However, they have got no personal support from them. So it's really important for us to figure out like, what do you need the scholarship funding for? What does your current financial situation look like? And then to back that up with supporting elements, right? While we trust them, we have to verify. So if you say your family's gross income is, $112,000 per year, now we need like a 1040 tax documentation or a FAFSA upload or things like that. So being able to not just collect the raw data, but also collecting highly sensitive, which we'll come back to, file uploads and documents. Because at the end of the day, in a highly regulated industry, you have to be very, very careful with not only what you collect, but how you collect it. So Reviewr has you kind of covered on the security side. One question that I always do like to ask as well is, okay, great. So based off of this information, if you don't receive a scholarship, how do you intend to pay for it, right? And you start to learn a lot about them. So you might have an applicant from a high income family. However, they're getting no support and they're going to go take out a 7% student loan. You might have another one who doesn't come from a high income family, but they have, a 531 plan or they've got a bunch of savings already in place. So it's kind of, again, taking all of this data, combining it together to tell me more about what scholars are most eligible than the other. So then the last piece of this puzzle is personal storytelling. Again, if you could build a submission experience for your scholars, you in theory could do it off of one page, and it's this page alone. As a scholar, tell us more about why this scholarship is important to you. What are you going to do with this funding? And tell us more about how it's going to change your life. These essay prompts and these entries, it's the personal narratives are the number one way to differentiate one candidate from the next. So you can do that through, a series of, text-based essays. We are seeing a pretty tremendous trend moving towards video content as well. Number one is it's a way to engage with a younger demographic. They're far more familiar with creating video content than text. Two, it's far more compelling from a marketing perspective. It's really good marketing collateral that you guys have. So the last thing I want to touch on here are letters of recommendation. And again, if you guys want to offer any feedback in the chat, if you guys are offering letters of rec, please do so. There's a pretty big trend that we've seen within this space. So I would say probably 95% of all scholarships have external letters of recommendation. The challenge with those is generally it should not be submitted by the applicant themselves. It should come from the person writing the letter. So what happens? You guys could have the most bulletproof, well-oiled machine, but then these references get sent to you via email. So what happens if it goes to spam? How are you, figuring out who they are? Who do they belong to? How do you recompile it back with the scholarship application? It becomes very challenging. How do you redact the data? So what a lot of our clients are doing is in the application, they're actually asking for who is the person submitting the reference. They put in their name, they put in their email, and then what happens is that our system, at least, can trigger a direct notification saying, hey, Steve, you've been asked to write a reference on behalf of Kyle. Click here to do so. Better yet, it actually brings them into a dedicated reference portal. So this is kind of like that gray area where this is purely just best practices. Take it for what it's worth. I personally do not believe in letters of recommendation for many reasons. Number one, they're hard to write. Number two is most applicants procrastinate, which means that if you're writing a letter, you're being asked like the day before it's due to submit it. And then number three is they're incredibly inconsistent. They become a better reflection of the writing ability of the reference, not necessarily who it's for. So what a lot of our clients have started to do is they've templated it. So, they're asking the reference to rank them on a series of qualities that they're looking for in a scholar and or they offer essay prompts. So like, what are two little short form prompts you want that reference to talk about? It serves the same purpose as a reference letter, but from a pure reference perspective, it lowers the barrier for them. They just come in, they just answer the questions, they're on with their life. Now, what that does is it creates higher quality references. It makes it easier to redact the data. And then when your committees sit down to review all these applications and make selections, you really are comparing apples to apples because all the references discuss the same topics. It's still their own unique content, it's still their own personal stories, but at least the topics themselves are very consistent. So the next thing I want to look at is operational. So again, you might be able to mimic what I just showed you guys using Google Forms and all these other tools, although they're not going to be very profile centric. The one thing that becomes a big challenge though is purely from a data security perspective. How do we hold and store this information? And then as you guys know, there's about 10 to 12 different moving parts to managing scholarship operations. Collecting applications is one of those. So how do you have a centralized hub to view activity, do communication, generate reports, share those entries with your team for review and selection? How do you redact the data? All these really important components. So that's the next thing I want to show you. And again, yes, this certainly is Reviewr, but I do want to kind of just visualize like what it looks like for you guys who are pursuing these types of tools. So you guys basically get these command centers, and these will show you in real time what's going on. So dates and deadlines, recent activity. And then for me, the most important component there is where are people in this journey? And that whole where are they is kind of a loose term because everybody's journey looks differently. On the front end, you can kind of measure who's in progress, right? So I mentioned before that scholars will always procrastinate. So who's done, who's not done? If they're not done, who are they? How far are they made it? You can send them automated reminders. That in itself typically increases participation rates by about 31%. So again, if you guys convert 25% of them into like long-term accounts, the LTV already kind of pays for itself, but 31% increase in participation. On the trail end of that, as you go through your review and selection process, you're going to select people that you're going to fund, right? So then at that point, do you need them to come back and submit additional deliverables, acceptance packets, fund disbursement forms? So who's in that stage? Have they yet done those deliverables? Yes or no? If not, send them reminders. And then the third piece to that is, again, maybe something you're not doing now, but that's your impact reporting. So 1 year from now, who do we want to come back to self-reflect and self-report on how the funds were used? Who's in that stage? Have they done it or not? And then send them reminders. Again, these reminders go a long way. Plus, it grants full visibility into the workflow. And this becomes even more important on a multi-year program where you're going to have like net new scholars entering, all the time. But then you're going to have 2, 3, 4 years worth of people who are still in your impact stages. The other thing that you have to kind of do here is visualize that profile. I can't underestimate or undervalue the benefits of having profiles because again, it's not just forms, it's not just file uploads. Like there's 8 to 10 moving parts that go into managing scholarships. Those 8 to 10 components have to be centralized and stored together. So instead of looking at these programs from a pure data perspective, look at it how it really is. These are people, these are your members, and we want to treat them as such. So every submitted scholar shows up in this menu. You can sort and filter by, stages. You can filter by the different years, the different scholarships, whatever your process looks like. And then from there, you simply click into the applicant profile. And here's how you can start to visualize what I was talking about. So in this case, we have Michael. Michael is a scholar. And in the center of my page is all of the content and deliverables that we've collected from he or she. So here's their information, here's their forms, there's their file uploads, there's their budgets, whatever data you've collected. From there, we have direct communication tools. So again, at any time, you can send bulk emails or bulk messages to literally anyone, not just them, but also your review team and your staff. You can also log internal notes about them. So very private, collaborative, log notes about them, share them with your team, but the applicants themselves can never physically see it. Going back to the file uploads, again, most scholarships have multiple documents. You're collecting fund disbursement forms, transcripts, resumes, references, FAFSA, and then a lot of times like letters of recommendation. So how do you store all of those documents safely, securely, and in a way that's easy for you guys to access? So in this example, I can see a list of all the documents we've collected. when I press view, it actually embeds that deliverable directly in front of me. What this means is that you and your team, as well as your review committees, theoretically never have to download anything and re-export things back out. You interact with the entire scholarship in one dedicated hub. This becomes equally important for your review committee. So if they're like me, I've got two little kids. If I'm helping you review your scholarship applications, I'm doing this on Wednesday at 10:30 on my couch on my tablet. You physically cannot ask me to go look at 100 submissions, download their deliverables, go to a spreadsheet and send it back. I have to log into one spot and do everything in one place. So, kind of moving on that front, going back to those references, like I mentioned before, every submitted reference does live on their profile. It shows you the status of it. And then, similar to those files, if I open it up, it actually embeds what the reference said. So, again, what we started with was Michael creating a profile, which has now grown into profile, forms, files, communication, results, and ongoing deliverables that you've requested from them. So the last thing I want to look at here is probably I'm going to do two at one. I'm going to talk about the review and selection as well as impact reporting in kind of one sitting. And this is, I think, the most important element to all programming. You could have the most well-oiled application form. You can be systematically as efficient as possible. But when the reviews start to come in, how do we ensure data is being redacted? How do we ensure that we're using qualitative metrics to ensure that we're not being biased and we're selecting the most qualified candidates? How do we avoid what I call reviewer fatigue, where you have limited staff time? How do we get them in, get them out in a very timely manner, giving the applicants the time and energy that they truthfully deserve from you guys? How do you start to identify judging tendencies from your team? All these types of things that really could cripple the scholarships if not done appropriately. So before we can kind of go there, first and foremost, we need to look at like what does a review workflow look like? And there are so many ways that you guys can do this. And for me, I like to take a step back and figure out like what is the structure of your programming. So if you have multiple scholarships, that's one element to it. Generally speaking, I also like multi-phase review. At some point, every scholar starts to look very similar to one another. So how do you kind of take your large N or your large number of applications, and large is relative, it could be 20, it could be 200, and then narrow it down to like the most qualified people that you want to spend your time on. And then the third piece to that is what I call like avoiding reviewer fatigue. So right now in Reviewr, from some of the surveys that we've done, most team members who are looking at scholarship applications cannot look at more than 40 people. It seems like a low number, but their energy does drop off pretty dramatically. And even using the same scorecard, the first person that gets reviewed versus the 41st person are actually scored on a different scale. So that means if you are a scholar and you are the 41st person that was reviewed, you are going to be negatively penalized just purely for the sake of time, right? So how do you combat that? So for me, I like to create what I call review buckets, and it's a way for you guys to basically categorize and segment your collected applications, and then share them out to your team in a more bite-sized format to share the workload. So you can do this a couple different ways. If you have multiple scholarships, you could consider having a committee per scholarship. So maybe where it says phase one, that is the Lennox Wilder scholarship, and I have Sally, Sue, and Steve in charge. Phase two here could actually be like the Brooke Marlowe scholarship, and that's in charge of Cindy, Tony, and Paul. So you have a broader staff, but when they come in to do the review, they're only focused on a certain subset of the applications. You could break it down by phase. So phase one might be like an internal team doing a quick high-level pre-rank and vetting. Move them on to phase two. You've got your boards, your committees, your members coming in. They're the ones who are doing more formal judging and scoring, things like that. You could also consider, and this is what I highly recommend, is what I call a random review. So the reason why I say that is you can open these buckets up. And if we know for a fact that on average, our review committee really shouldn't be looking at more than 40 people, what you could do is you could actually bulk select all of your scholars, click auto assign, and say give each one to roughly 40 reviewers. So that way we're basically managing the workload capacity from our review team, while at the same time, every scholar is getting reviewed the exact same number of equal random times. And that's a question you have to ask yourself is like, how many reviews do we need per scholar to make sure we have complete coverage? On our end, we think that's roughly 10 to 12. And that might be on the high end. So the idea is say, okay, well, I want each scholar to be reviewed 10 to 12 times. However, I want my team to never look at more than 40 people. Our system will then equally and randomly take the entries and then share them out. Now, the key detail there is when it gets randomly shared out, what they see is also random. So when the review team comes in to conduct a review, number one is that we want you to redact data. If there's any data that you're collecting that could be negatively influence the perception from that review staff member, name, relationships, demographic details, school, location, all of those elements should be redacted from their point of view. We want your review committees looking at scholars and reviewing them on the merits of their need, not who they are. So that's number one. Number two is when your review team comes in, we want the submissions that they're scoring to be in a random order. The reason why I say that is if you do it alphabetically or if you tell your team to review down a certain list, they will always review from top down. And again, going back to like reviewer fatigue, that means the first scholar got the fresh energy from every single committee member. The person whose last name starts with the letter Z got the rushed reviews from literally everyone. So when your team comes in, this list is both redacted and random, which means it's equal energy for all. From there, they simply click into the scholar and they're able to then do a direct inline review. So again, the number one goal here is to lower the barrier for your review team. We want to make their time as efficient as possible because that's a reflection of like the energy the applicant gets. Number two is we want them to stay hyper focused on what they need to be looking at. So in your applications, again, you might be collecting tax documentation as a way to verify income. However, it's purely for verification purposes. Does it impact the selection? Probably not. So not only should you redact personal identifying information, but if there's any information that you're collecting that just isn't necessary for the review, hide that as well. But the goal there is to be hypersensitive to time. So your teams simply come in, they can side by side look at the scholarship application. They can fill out their score sheet. That's the other thing I want to kind of address here, which is qualitative review. Now, I fully understand that all programs should have some type of subjective deliberation, right? But at the end of the day, we want to have data that drives those conversations. So you should be structuring a scorecard that aligns with what you're looking for in a scholar. On a scale from 1 to 5, how does their essay relate to our mission and vision? On a scale from 1 to 5, what does their financial needs look like? On a scale from 1 to 5, tell us more about their community involvement and their volunteers, right? You can keep it simple, but basically you map every element to your mission and your vision and what you're looking for in a scholar. So that, again, it creates data-driven results. It also creates tremendous consistency and expectations amongst your review staff. Nobody's kind of going off on their own and subjectively scoring people. They have a very clear direction that they should be going down. So review team can kind of side by side view the content, fill out their score sheets. They can jump up to those file uploads. They can look at resumes and transcripts directly in Reviewr. They can check out those letters of recommendation. And then when your team is done reviewing, they simply submit and they move on to the next. And they rinse and repeat that process until they're done reviewing. Now, from a pure metric perspective, as soon as this is done, you guys get these built-in leaderboards. And this is going to show you in real time every single scholar who from your team reviewed them and how they did the reviews, either individually, collectively, aggregates, you name it. This is the data that you guys will eventually need to make your decisions. We don't make decisions for you. We just give you the data that you need. So what many of our clients will do is they'll say, well, if it's a larger program, we need to create a cutoff line. Like what are the top 25% that we want to do a second review on? You can then start to flag them from here and then to move them to phase 2 or phase 3. Others will say, okay, well, these are the results. Let's pre-share this amongst our staff. And then you guys can then use this to power deliberation meetings, right? So these are the results. Let's now talk about why we scored the way that we did. And there really could be a compelling case why somebody else moves up that list. So I want to touch on 2 more quick things. I'm trying to like rapid fire throw out as many best practices as I can. I'm a huge advocate, as I'd mentioned, about random review, right? I like to share the workload amongst my staff. I don't want to overwhelm people. The downside of that is that means that not every applicant gets reviewed by the same people. So what happens if you've got a staff member or a committee member that on average scores higher or lower than their peers? So for example, down here, Mark scored this scholar a 12. So what if Mark on his own standard never has given higher than a 14? He or she scored that applicant tremendous. However, compared to other judges, that applicant's actually being negatively impacted. So how do you start to normalize that? So we actually have a really cool report. I'm just going to kind of really quickly throw this out there that shows you on a per team member basis what is their individual judging tendencies. So you can kind of see that on average, Judge Judy scores about a 24, but Tony scores about a 34. That means if I, as Kyle the scholar, was scored by Judge Judy, I am going to be at a disadvantage. So this report not only helps you be aware of that, it also takes it into consideration. It says, well, you know what? We don't care because we recruited Judge Judy because we value her feedback. What this data really tells us is a 24 by Judge Judy is actually the same score as a 34 by Tony. It's their own personal average. And then this report basically compares individual averages versus one another and gives you guys a new normalized result. So it's a really impactful tool for you guys, again, to ensure that there are no biases or judging tendencies that are impacting the results of the scholars. Long-winded here, but the last thing I want to touch on is the ongoing impact reporting. So congratulations, you've now been selected for a scholarship. Now I need two things from you. I need an acceptance packet. I need you to accept our terms. And then I also, in 1 year, I want you to come back and fill out a self-survey of how those funds were used and tell me how it changed your life. So applicants actually come back into Reviewr, they click add, and they get a predefined list of those additional deliverables. So in this example, I want to do my scholar acceptance packet. I simply click select, I fill it out directly on my profile. And then as soon as I submit, it gets logged directly back on my account. So again, going back to bigger picture, Michael started by telling us who they are. It's now progressed to holding on to all of these activities that relate to he or she. On the impact reporting side of things, since it's both consistent and it's stored together, you guys can now start to generate results such as this year we funded X number of people. Here's kind of a breakdown of the type of people that we funded. Here's the average amount per person. And then 1 year from now, we can say, here's like the testimonials that we've gotten. Here's how much, student loan that they're expected to graduate with, these impactful measurements that you guys need. So